All right, so this video is going to talk about Bellevue, and I've talked about Bellevue before, but kind of not in the best of terms, and not necessarily to throw shade on Bellevue. It's a really nice city, but it's out of reach for most people. And I often get people who will come on and ask questions about where should I live? Should I live in Seattle or should I live like in some of these other cities that are up to the north? And they kind of exclude certain other cities. And a lot of this is driven on prejudices that people have, mainly because of misinformation or from secondhand information or from other people. And so, what I want people to understand is that a lot of times you have to understand reality because not everyone can afford to live in Bellevue. Most people cannot. When I say most people in the country cannot afford to live in a city like Bellevue today. Now, I'm not talking about Bellevue of 30 years ago or 20 years ago. It was different. Bellevue back in the day was just a regular city, and it's kind of like the bedroom community of Seattle. It was kind of a place to live away from Seattle, but you had kind of a close proximity to Seattle because you could take the bridge. Let me see what bridges we're talking about here. One is the floating bridge, where which is pretty awesome. It's actually the longest uh, concrete floating bridge in the world, but which is I-90, which you can literally take over Lake Washington from Bellevue and get into Seattle, right? Before that, it was ferry services. So people will ask questions like, well, I want to live in a really nice area. And when you're on the West Coast, coming from the Midwest or the South or what have you, coming over to the West Coast, pricier areas are really pricey. Okay, really pricey. You have some people who don't want to live in, for example, just a regular place that they can easily afford. But they want to live in the top places, and they think that that correlates with their kids' education. But keep in mind, your kid can go to any school within that particular district. So if you live in Seattle, you can send your kid to any other school that's in Seattle. Now, yeah, they may have to be put onto a list and you have to check and wait and see if they're going to be put into that classroom. And you would have to get them to and from their class or to and from their school. But you're not in a situation where you're actually held to, because I live in this particular area, my kid's going to have a horrible um, school experience. That's just not true. So some people, instead of living, and it goes everywhere. Some people, instead of living in places like San Diego, which is the main city, and they could probably afford, I don't know, uh, I forget the one, Mira Mesa. They can afford Mira Mesa, and it would be the perfect place for them. They want to live in La Jolla. And again, it's super expensive. Back in my hometown, we have and it doesn't come close to any of these prices. But you have the city, but within the city you have neighborhoods that are a little bit more expensive, a little bit more pricier. And so I think that a lot of people are taking it from that viewpoint of, oh, well, I'll just live in the pricier part of the neighborhood and I'll be good, right? Even in Albuquerque, there's a place called Cabazon, which is a little bit more pricier area of Rio Rancho and Albuquerque, and people want to live there. But the pricier port, when you're talking about Albuquerque and Cabazon, and when you're talking about my hometown and Steeplechase and Heartland and all those places, the price difference is not that drastic. When you're talking, you know what I mean? It's not a drastic change as what you're going to experience on the West Coast. And I can say that from, living in the Midwest. I've lived in Cincinnati, Indianapolis, the same thing. Even though people in Indianapolis, you have Carmel You have, you have Fishers, you have those places. But again, the prices in Fishers and Carmel are not so way out of whack that one couldn't live there. You know what I mean? Like, there are homes that are expensive there. Don't get me wrong. Very expensive. But anyone with a pretty decent job could find a place and make it. They may be skimping by, but they can make it. That's not really the case on the West Coast. It's a completely different animal. So some people want to live in Bellevue, but they can't really afford Bellevue. Bellevue is more expensive than Seattle. If you can't make it in Seattle, you're not going to make it in Bellevue. It's as simple as that. And you can't go there, especially when you factor in kids. Let me turn this off. It's getting a little toasty in here. When you factor in kids, then expect your prices to go up drastically because childcare here is very expensive. Very expensive. And so I think that a lot of times people will say, well, I can make it here on such and such, and I can do well here where I'm from on this amount. It's a completely different dinosaur when you come over here. Even people who come from Chicago or Minneapolis or pick a city, it is completely different here. To give you an idea, in Bellevue, if you make a salary of $82,000, which a lot of people in Bellevue today make more than that. Now, back when I was a baby, that wasn't the case. Bellevue was probably not super expensive. It was still kind of hoity-toity, but it wasn't like what it is today. Today, it is an exclusive place. To give you an example, if Seattle is Los Angeles, then Bellevue is our Hollywood. It's Seattle's Hollywood. And places like Medina, which is where two of the world's wealthiest men live, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, I think even maybe Steve Ballmer, who owns the Clippers, also may live there. That's kind of like our Beverly Hills, right? That's probably a good, and Medina is just right smack dab next to Bellevue. Medina is more on the lake. It's right there on the lake. Bellevue is a little bit off of it. But that gives you an idea, okay? It's probably the best way I can sum it up. And then Mercer Island is kind of like a mix because there's super expensive properties there, some that are not so much. It's very, very, very pricey. Very pricey. So a lot of times people will say, oh, I'm going to live there, but they can afford Tacoma. But they don't want to live in Tacoma. They don't want to live in Everett. They want to live in a place that's way beyond their means. If you're not making a good $100 and something thousand a year, Bellevue's not going to be the place for you. Especially if you have kids. It's just not going to be the place for you because things there are so expensive. This is something that's coming from bestplaces.net. And they're talking about the 2019 cost of living. If you make $82,000 in Bellevue, Seattle, you're making about $72,000. So it's a $10,000 difference. Just right out the gate. So if you're making 72 grand in Seattle, a person in Bellevue doing the same job is probably making about $82,000. Now, throw that back onto Tacoma. That person in Tacoma is probably going to be making about $52,000 to $62,000. Gives you an idea. When you're talking about the cost of living overall, so we're talking just overall. We're not talking about being a homeowner. We're not talking about childcare, taxes, none of that. Bellevue versus Tacoma, you're going to be paying 12% more to live in Bellevue than you would in Seattle. I'm sorry, I said Tacoma. Bellevue versus Seattle, you're going to be paying 12% more to live in Bellevue than you would in Seattle. Okay? Food and groceries are pretty much the same. Housing, big difference. You're going to be almost 20% more expensive to buy a house in Bellevue than it would be in Seattle. Now, one of the things here that I don't know if this is exactly correct, because the prices here have tumbled a little bit, but it says that the median home price in Seattle is $761,800. That's changed. That's changed a little bit. Sure, there are homes that are definitely in that range. There are some that are much more than that. But that's changed a little bit. It says the median home price in Bellevue is $941,700. That is kind of close to being more correct. Bellevue prices didn't change. They didn't drop as hard as they did in Seattle. It's still very expensive. I would say it's probably more in the 800,000 range, high eights in Bellevue. And Seattle is probably in the sixes at this point. But they're saying that that's $179,900 difference if you go based on what bestplaces.net is saying. So $180,000 difference. That is a huge mountain to climb. A lot of people have a hard time affording a house for $180,000. And you're going to an area, and this correlates too with rents. Renting in Bellevue, you got to understand, Bellevue looks like a smaller version of Seattle. It's got glass towers all over the place. And it's weird to see a city so small. And when we came here, it didn't have as many glass towers as it does today. Now it has a lot of luxury towers and all of that weird design buildings that fold and bend and arc. It is a very ritzy place to live. Again, it's kind of like our Hollywood. I know that Hollywood has some areas that's kind of like, but I mean, that's probably the best example I can say because it's not Beverly Hills status. You can find a lot of the most expensive stores in the entire state there. Louis Vuitton, Gucci. You can find a lot of them. Many more that I don't even know the names of, like super expensive luxury stores, much more pricier than that. In Bellevue, can't even find some of them even in Seattle. It's a very ritzy place. When it comes to utilities, you're going to pay probably 3% less in Seattle than you would in Bellevue. When it comes to transportation, in this is the difference though. Seattle is going to be about almost 6% more, 5.7% more. That's not a shock because Seattle is going to probably take the rank for the entire area. It's more expensive in terms of transportation in Seattle than it is in other places because they're on a huge build for transportation there. It's going to be a little bit more pricier. And there's also a lot of measures and things that the city does on its own that's going to make that a little bit more expensive. I talked about that in a different video that I haven't published yet, which I think is ridiculous. But anyway, that's besides the point. It's going to be the same case if you look down at Tacoma. It's going to be cheaper transportation here than it would be up in Seattle overall. Health costs are the same. They don't talk about all of that type stuff. They don't even talk about childcare. Miscellaneous is going to be pretty much about the same. So they're saying that overall it's about 12% cheaper to live in Bellevue or live in Seattle than it is in Bellevue. The biggest factor is the median home cost, which makes for the cost difference. So it's almost 20% cheaper. And this may be even outdated, probably is greater than that. It's 20% cheaper to live in Seattle than it is in Bellevue. So keep that in mind. When you're looking at rents, same thing, because it radiates out. This is a huge hiring center, meaning we're talking some of the top tech talent lives in this general area. Some of the top tech companies in the world are based right there in Bellevue, or at least have offices. Amazon has several towers that they are renting there in Bellevue. So don't think that Amazon's just located in Seattle. It's not. It's also in Bellevue. Facebook is actually located there in Bellevue. They're taking over 2 towers. Many other companies. So Bellevue is home to a lot of tech companies, and it's home to a lot of office uh, a lot of offices in general. So yeah, it's expensive. Now, when we're talking about Bellevue, it doesn't have a lot of the cultural amenities that you're going to expect from a bigger city. It doesn't have that. It doesn't have a theater district. It doesn't have any of that. What it does have is a pretty cool performing arts center. It does have nice parks and things like that, one of which is downtown. It's really nice, very peaceful, tranquil. It gives you a piece of, it takes you away from the hustle and bustle. When you're in the park, you can see the skyline all around you. And it's kind of like a circular park. So it's really, really cool. Has a nice little fountain. This is all from memory here. It's really nice. The other cool thing about Bellevue is its downtown mall. It actually has two. One is more of an exclusive hoity-toity mall, which is not that big, but it's got big names in it. And then you have Bellevue Square, which is a nice mall, pretty decent size in downtown Bellevue. And again, it's really, really nice. You have a lot of different stores that are all around the city. So it's a shopper's paradise. It really and truly is. But again, it's more of the higher end. I think that people have to really understand where their budget is. It's one thing, like take for example, and I've said this before, could we have gotten a house in Seattle? Yeah. But why go through the massive expense and the smaller yards and all the stuff you have to go through to get a house, and also the property taxes, which are insane. Keep in mind, Bellevue is in King County, which is the same county that Seattle is in. Counties pretty much set a lot of policies that everybody has to follow. And who sets most of the policies? Seattle. So as Seattle goes as a city, a lot of times the county will say sure, because it's the main draw. So to me, a lot of times I tell folks, yeah, if you are making great money, if you're a mid-level tech person, and I'm not talking entry level. There's a lot of people who, have an IT degree. That doesn't mean jack, because a lot of IT people get paid decent. Folks that just fresh out of school, but decent's not going to work. I'm talking mid-level. If you're a mid-level tech person on up, Bellevue's not a problem. If you're an executive, not a problem. Bellevue's not going to be a concern. There's some people, this is not a concern. For some people, throwing down $1 million for a house, not an issue, right? Most people can't do that. For some people, having rent that is, $5,000 a month, not an issue. Now, can you find rent there in Bellevue that's like $1,900? Yeah, but you're basically renting out the man cave here for $1,900, a little bit bigger. A lot of the rents are going to be well over the $2,000 range. It's that way in Seattle. So your money doesn't go as far. And if you're not making good money, then you're always going to be behind. It's not going to feel right. You're going to feel out of place. Bellevue is not a place. I don't even feel comfortable in Bellevue, to be honest with you. I don't feel comfortable in Bellevue. Definitely don't feel. I've never even been to Medina. There's no point. You know what I mean? Like there's certain places where I definitely know I don't fit, don't kind of belong. It's just kind of a hoity-toity. Now, have I been to Bellevue numerous times? Sure, absolutely. But you won't feel comfortable if your pockets can't easily absorb money, and it's not an issue. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to feel comfortable in your skin. In Seattle, you'll feel a lot more comfortable in your skin overall than you would in Bellevue. And when you're talking about places like Everett and Tacoma, yeah, they don't have the splash. And they don't have all the boom. But your pockets will be a lot more relaxed. Childcare is a lot more affordable. The transportation, taxes, everything is going to be a lot more manageable than in places like Seattle, and definitely in places like Bellevue, and more so even in places like Medina. Those Redmond, all those places are very, very expensive. Even when you go out to Issaquah, it's starting to bleed over into places where people didn't even want to go to because it was kind of far away from Seattle. And it's as you get closer to those areas, it's where all the snow and the bad weather and stuff. But even those places are becoming so pricey that 10 years ago wasn't the case. Other places are starting to feel the ripple effects of Seattle too. Bremerton, they went and got the fast ferry, and now, boom, prices started to go up, right? Because now it's much easier to get to and from Seattle. The whole Kitsap County by itself is focusing on transportation and how to get to and from Seattle a lot easier. So a lot of different cities in Kitsap County are now focusing on launching fast ferries to Seattle. So it's basically building up their population base pretty easily. Because what they're saying is we don't have to be a part of Sound Transit, which they're not. They're not a part of Sound Transit. So we don't have to be a part of that. We can basically invest in ourselves and then let the folks, the taxpayers who are a part of Sound Transit, build up the entire rail system and everything else. So as long as we get you to Seattle, you can get to wherever you got to go. We don't have to worry about it. It's just getting you there. We don't have to worry about begging Kenmore to come over here and fly from here to Seattle. We don't have to worry about taking the long, sluggish ferry that carries cars over. You don't need cars. You just basically hop on and boom, you're over there in no time. So Kitsap County, very smart, is becoming a place where a lot of people are looking at because it's an alternative. It's a place that's a little bit more desirable. So you're going to see prices, and they're going up. Used to be not the case, but now they're up higher than it is here in Tacoma. So my point is that look beyond just Bellevue. Only a select few people are going to be able to really, especially if you have a family. If you have a family, only a select few are going to be able to really make it there. A lot of times people say, well, I'm a single parent, or I'm, whatever. It's going to be hard unless now, don't get me wrong. There are some single parents who are like CEOs and executives and that's different. But if you're making $50,000 a year, I wouldn't even attempt going to Bellevue. Just my opinion. Anyhow, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, I will see you. Take care.